Hey everyone, I'm Joe. Today it's time for me to talk about my 2019 book statistics. This covers both the books I read during 2019 as well as all the books I purchased or otherwise obtained. And when I say obtain, I mean via sources like via the publisher directly or from presents, Christmas or birthday. Anyway, first I'll get started talking about the 3 read books stats that I do not need graphs for, so I won't need to change the camera angle just this moment. And those are: the total number of books read during 2019 was 133. This was a really nice high number. It cannot compare to 2018, which was an exceptionally high year as far as everything related to books goes, as far as both reading and books purchased. It was both ridiculously high. I can't really compare to that year, but every other year this was a nice high number. It was one of the best years I've had in a very long time, and I'm very pleased with the number of books I read. As far as the total page count of the combined books go, that was 49,409, which again I'm very pleased with. It's a shame that I didn't realise just how close it was to 50,000 at the end of the year, and managed to read 1 or 2 more books to push it to that 50,000 number. Well, that's only an irrelevant little personal thing that I would have liked to have got, but whatever, it's not important. And that means the average page count of all the books I read in 2019 was 371, which, if you know me, that actually sounds a little bit more closer to my usual unpredictable books that I often talk about in great depth on this channel, because I often wave quite large books around. Obviously the numbers that you get this average down is of course some of the much smaller books like short story collections and such. So it is a good average overall, and is quite a good sign of what I read. You know, I don't read that many massive books, like 800 plus. So it's quite a good number overall. So as you can see by the fact that there has been an angle change, this is now ready for some actual graphs to appear. And the first of those will be books read per month. And as you can see, this was consistent with 2 notable gaps, those being August and December. August is due to the fact I went to the Worldcon in Dublin, so of course that is dominated by making sure I had everything ready for that. So reading took a backseat, relatively speaking, and obviously I didn't really read when I was in Dublin. And the other was December, where that is purely due to the fact that it's the end of the year, of getting various end of the year type videos done, as well as various other things that tend to happen towards the end of the year, obviously Christmas as well. So I don't tend to read less during December. I don't know why. Some people tend to read more. Sometimes I have read more in December, but not for a while now. December seems to be my light reading month for some reason. Just one of them odd things. Next up is the genre breakdown. This is interesting, although very predictable, because as you would expect from me, science fiction dominates really heavily. I read over 60% science fiction every year, year in, year out. This isn't changing this year, and it's not going to change next year more than likely, because I've got more science fiction on my shelf than any other genre by a large margin, and I am trying to read my owned but unread books at the moment, which for the record will come into play in a minute because that affects other stats as well. So this graph is pretty predictable, to be honest. You know, a large amount of fantasy with the other genres taking up only a very small percentage in total. So, you know, normal business for me. Next up is the author gender, and as you can see, this is not as good as I would have liked to have achieved this year, because it is lower than 2018 by quite a margin. In fact, 2018 I actually managed to get an almost dead even 50-50 male to female split. This year, yeah, I didn't manage anywhere near it. That was because, as I just mentioned previously, I was trying to read my owned but unread books. Most of those that I've owned for a very long time and have been sitting on these shelves behind me for a long time are by male authors. Therefore, this stat will be skewed towards that way. I don't mind too much because I want to get my unread books read for a change. So I don't mind if this start is going to have to go by the wayside and be pushed aside temporarily whilst I reduce my number of unread books. I'm quite happy to have it suffer for now, not too long term though. Next up is author origin, and again this is quite predictable for me due to the unread but owned books that I'm trying to work on, because this is dominated by American authors with a very large amount of UK authors, and the rest of the world comprises a very small proportion indeed. And this is something I knew would happen because it normally does happen where it's dominated by America and a large amount of UK, because that just happens to be where the authors live authors born, I should say. I count authors where they are born for origin. So this is kind of not very interesting stuff, frankly, because this is I read books based on their description, not based on the author. So it's kind of irrelevant in some ways. Well, it's vaguely curious to see. Next up is the year published, and this might be slightly less predictable than some years because I've actually read a lot more books within the last 10 years than in the years preceding that. Usually for me, and indeed I've got a bit of a reputation on BookTube now for reading older books and the backlist books of authors. Obviously things like the SF Masterworks plays into this older books reading statistic. However, in 2019 I actually managed to read quite a few books that are relatively new, and I'm quite pleased with this, that it's managed to get a much more even split, because it is slightly higher in the last decade but not by much, and it's slightly more, so it's quite even, and I'm quite happy with it actually. I'm quite pleased with this. So this is one of my most sort of good and sort of useful stats in that way. Next up is the most predictable stat in this video, and indeed it's the most predictable stat in any of my previous stats videos as well, and that is the book format, because as always paperback completely and utterly rules this stat. I own almost entirely paperbacks with only a very small proportion of hardbacks. I only read my Kindle occasionally, probably every other month I might read a single Kindle book. So this is not a surprise to anybody, you know, and it's not going to change anytime soon. And frankly, it's kind of a dull stat because you can literally see how this stat is going to go by the fact that all you can see behind me is nothing for paperbacks. So it's kind of boring, frankly. And the last stat for books read is via the publisher, and this one is again very predictable because Gollancz and Orbit, who obviously they are directly linked to, dominate this really quite badly, as you can see on the graph, because those two publishers, at least in the UK, which is obviously where I am currently living for now, publish an awful lot of the authors and the types of books that I like to read. Certain other big science fiction publishers like Tor and obviously their parent company Macmillan are harder to get in the UK and also quite expensive, so as a result they tend to be much smaller percentages. Maybe if I was in the UK, I would imagine that would probably be very and radically different stats, but I am UK based, therefore Gollancz and Orbit for me with my science fiction preferences dominate, and at the moment that's unlikely to change anytime soon. Now onto the books that I purchased or otherwise obtained. In total I obtained 41 books during the year, which is actually the smallest number of books I obtained in many years now, which I'm really pleased by. And I would like to say that out of all those 41 books, I actually read all 41 of them in 2019. This is the first time and only time so far in my entire life, in fact, I believe, that I have actually read every book I purchased in that same year. I have never achieved this before. I may never achieve it again, I don't know. I've got a good chance to in 2020 because I am trying to go for many of the same goals, but I can't say for sure. So this is a goal I'm particularly pleased with overall. And the total amount of money spent in 2019 was £268.04, which means that the average spend per month was £22.34. This again is really good, and I'm really happy with these stats, because my goal was to spend no more than £750 overall in the year. I spent just over a third of that, so this is really impressive. I mean, it helps when, for instance, you had a Worldcon to go for in 2019 and I'm going to another Worldcon this year, which is even more expensive. So and that money has to come from somewhere, ergo it's coming from my book buying budget, which is a shame, but I'm totally fine with that, because frankly, meeting up with the booktube at that Worldcon and things is great, and I'm not going to argue with that because I enjoy it so much. Anyway, on to the books purchased and obtained stats that actually require graphs. The first of those is purchased over time. Now this, as you can tell, and indeed is usual for me almost every year, there is a higher amount of books at the start of the year, and then this figure goes down throughout the course of the year. This is generally because at the start of the year, there's a bunch of books that I often have had on my list for a little while that I've got due to a booktube and just due to things I've seen myself I normally want to get, and I normally sort of let myself off with buying books in January. Basically, it's like I can buy almost what I want without having to think about it too much. I'm not sure will that happen in 2020, because the Worldcon is even more expensive this year than it was previously, but I still suspect it might be the same, at least slightly. It just won't be such a big increase and then drop. I suspect it will be only just slight. Next up is the genre breakdown, and just like the books read, this is very predictable, although it has one unusual thing about it. But the predictable thing is that it is 70% science fiction with 30% fantasy. The unusual thing is the fact that no other genre is on this graph at all. As you can tell, it is literally only science fiction and fantasy, nothing else. That's actually unusual. I bought no horror books, not even one. I didn't buy any literary fiction or general fiction books. Normally there's at least one that sneaks onto my purchased books during the year, although the small number of books that I actually obtained during the year does explain this quite well, really, because I only bought a small number compared to previous years. It's not that surprising, really. Next up is author gender, and like the books read, this is fairly predictable and not as good as I would like. Not quite as bad as books read, because it is merely 70% male this time around. Not by much though, is it better? And again, this is purely because the books I happen to want this year at various points happen to be by male authors, and in several cases I was also trying to buy books in series who happen to be by male authors. So this is one of these things where I can't predict where it might happen. This year it could be very much the other way. For all I know, I don't plan my book buying out, and I can't predict whether they'll be by male or female authors. So this is something that is indeed can be an interesting stat. Sometimes it might not be. It depends on random chance, frankly, whether I buy books by male or female authors that particular year or not. Next up is again another very predictable stat for me, and that is book format. Again, this is even more dominated by paperback than the books read. 85% paperback. Frankly, you can tell by looking at my shelves that this is going to be dominated by paperback, and there's not much more to say about this. I really like paperback. I don't overly enjoy reading hardbacks for the most part, because they are generally harder to hold and heavier, and you can't carry them about as easily because they're physically wider and taller. Ebooks on Kindle, in my case, I don't mind reading, but the Kindle needs charging so often that it's frankly annoying, and despite what some people seem to find, I find that Kindle books are not that cheap compared to physical books. Normally Kindle books are almost the same price, or if not sometimes more expensive than paperbacks, which I think is really strange. But yeah, I don't find the prices of Kindle to be that impressive actually, so I generally prefer paperbacks as a rule. The penultimate stat is book source, And this one is actually the most interesting start of this video, personally for me, because as you can see, I purchased 40% of my books online from various retailers, and 50% of the books I purchased were in a store, or at a stall of whatever kind, in person. I was actually there buying a book from a person. This is actually a first for me. In previous years, it has always been dominated by online book buying. For the first time ever, I've actually bought more books in person than online. I am really pleased about this because it is nice to support, obviously, UK businesses for a change. Whereas previous years, what we've been online, sometimes it's been slightly more non-UK, although even the websites I use are often UK, so that's not necessarily always accurate, but for baseline, probably might be. And I'm really pleased with this start overall, because it's just, I'm actually supporting people within the UK. It might hopefully help to, if I do manage this and many other people manage it, to support more bookshops in the UK, and more bookshops might open. I do not have a large selection of bookshops near where I live, so by doing this, hopefully that might encourage more bookshops to be around. We can but hope. And the very final start of this video is the publisher of the books that I both bought and obtained, and as you can tell, and as you can probably predict, this is dominated by, yes, Gollancz again. Gollancz, as I said about the publishers in regards to my red books, publish a lot of the books that I happen to like. They are a science fiction imprint, and they dominate my book buying generally most years. In fact, obviously things like the SF Masterworks, the yellow spines that I'm always waving around in videos. Pretty much I wave around one of them at least every month, maybe every other month at most. You can make this to be a very predictable start, and it's not a very interesting start to actually end with, I suppose, but it is an interesting one nevertheless. So with that said, as you can now tell by the final angle change, that is it for all of the bookish stats in 2019. If you have been keeping any bookish stats, then please let me know if there are any particularly interesting ones that you are particularly proud of, and we're going to talk about them, or if there is anything else about my reading year that you'd like to know, or you'd like to see me go more in depth in some way, then again, please feel free to ask, and I will try to answer as best as I'm able. All my social media links, as well as links to anything that I might have mentioned in the video, can be found in the description box below. And with that said, that is it for this video. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you another day. Bye for now.